Hello my friends and welcome back to episode 3 of the, not episode 3, I think it's episode 4, episode 5 now of the Tolkien debate show, where today we are going to be discussing what was Sauron's biggest defeat. But joining me yet again, we firstly have Lexi from the YouTube channel Girl Next Gondor, all links will be in the description. Hello my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me again.
Indeed, great for you to be here. Also we have Florian as usual. Hello my friend.
Hey, glad to be here.
Indeed, and finally we have ImzoBud. So, as you can tell from the title and thumbnail, we're going to be discussing what was Sauron's biggest defeat and going through some events, some moments, and giving reasons as to why this might be the biggest defeat for the Dark Lord. And the reason I mentioned the Dark Lord is that we're going to be excluding anything from the first stage and prior, because we want to see defeats as Sauron being the Dark Lord and acting for himself, and not, for example, under the rule of, or under the vision of Morgoth. So the first event that we're going to be looking at, one of the, I believe, 3, is the War of the Elves and Sauron, and particularly a potential thing that we might see in the upcoming Amazon show, but that's besides the point. I think it's a really interesting event for many reasons, and Alexia, do you want to start this one off?
Yeah, this is my favorite pick because, again, as usual here, the way you answer the question kind of depends on how you understand the question. And for me, this is the greatest reversal of Sauron's fortunes. He literally has everything possible going for him. He's able to use his strategy and his talent for deceit and manipulation. He's forged the One Ring, which gives him more power, more efficacious power than he had in the first stage. The elves don't, they suspect that something's not quite right, but they're not ready for him the way that they are in the first stage. He's just fighting against elves, and elves that are greatly diminished from the height of their power back in the first stage. Numenor has yet to consolidate a real strong presence in Middle-earth at this point. They're basically an ocean away, so they're limited in what they can really do to help out. He really should have won this one. He had everything going for him, and he just suffers setback after setback after setback. He thinks the One Ring is going to allow him to just insta-dominate the elves, and of course they have a sort of backdoor clause. They recognize him and are able to resist him. Okay, fine. He takes Celebrimbor captive and says, well, now we're just, I'll force you with torture to surrender the rings, and Celebrimbor won't tell. He can't break him. So, mentally, he can't break him. Physically, he does quite a good job. And then he's, okay, now we're going to do this old-fashioned style. We're going to do this with military conquest. He's overrun Eregion. He's basically overrun Eriador. He's about to take Lindon, and then he turns around and looks, and sailing up the Grey Flood is the Numenorian fleet, and that just, he gets routed back to Mordor. So to me, that's like, he should have done better, but he didn't, and he didn't because of his own short-sightedness. There was no destiny or, catastrophe, no divine intervention. It's just him losing.
And I think the one thing that the takeaway from what you said is really that it's, out of all of the events we look at, it's the advantage that Sauron has at this point. And for example, the odds, you just burn through Eregion, you held their lord captive, and you waving him on his banner around. So yeah, and then of course then we've got due to Gil-Galad's aid from Lindon, they got the call to the Numenorians, I think, as he mentioned, and then they just come and just utterly demolish him. So Florian, do you think that is a fair assessment of why this is being picked as one of the 3?
Yeah, I think so. It's the biggest defeat in terms of Sauron being militarily outmatched. Like he's able to almost conquer Middle-earth because the Numenorians have like a few settlements only that they defended before, and like they aren't really involved with the war. But like when the Numenorian army arrives at Lindon, and then they also have like other contingents at Grethlow, and there's even a battle in what is later the borderlands between Rohan and Gondor, I think. Like the Numenorians clearly just outmatch his army. Like it's possible that it was just he was caught off guard and then driven back, but like the way it sounds that Sauron almost didn't make it out of the battle himself, like he was personally there and barely managed to escape, makes it sound like he really had no chance of militarily winning that conflict. Like it looked like he was about to win, but it's like a bit of a mystery. We don't really know what he thought about Numenor. Like did Sauron think they wouldn't intervene or they would intervene too late? It's a bit unclear, but it's like definitely the first showcase of how like overpowering the Numenorians are compared to everyone else.
For the first one, that is the War of the Elves and Sauron covered. Now the next event and potential defeat that we're going to be looking at is the War of the Last Alliance and some bits around late events in Numenor as well, which concern Sauron. And Florian, starting off with you, I think without a doubt we have to say that it is at the end of the Second Age. This event is the turning of the age as well. So even if it's not the biggest defeat of Sauron, it is still a massive event throughout Arda's history. So yeah, what do you think on this one?
Yeah, I think it's like the very, very significant compared to the War of the Elves and Sauron, because during the Last Alliance, of course, Sauron is actually completely defeated. Like he does retreat into Mordor, but his enemies actually follow him there and eventually force him into personal combat. But of course, what makes it different and very much different the War of Elves and Sauron is that Sauron is kind of like is doing the opposite. Like he's starting out with dealing with the Numenorians. Like he is brought to Numenor as a captive, but through his powers of persuasion and manipulation, like convinces the Numenorians to attack Valinor, which causes the whole island to sink, and Sauron dies, or his body dies at least, but he makes it out as his spirit makes it out, and he goes back to Mordor. Basically, he has taken out most of the Numenorians except the ones that escape, like Elendil, Isildur, and Anarion with their 9 ships, and then there's of course the Numenorians still living in Middle-earth, and those the Numenorians, the faithful ones that resist Sauron, team up with Gil-Galad and the elves and the dwarves of Khazad-dûm and presumably a lot of other peoples in the area, and they basically attack Sauron like relatively shortly after Numenor has been destroyed, in terms of like the overall timescale of the age, and they have a big battle in front of where the Black Gate will be in the future, and the forces of Sauron are driven back, and the elves and men and dwarves lay siege to Barad for 7 years before Sauron is forced to, basically there's no reserves left, and he comes out and kills Gil-Galad and Elendil, but they also kill him, and Isildur basically, after Sauron is killed, after his he cuts off the one ring from Sauron's finger, which basically means Sauron takes a very long, like he can't use his ring to help him regenerate. He has still kind of access to the power, but not like he can't use it directly, so he basically takes the whole Third Age for him to regenerate and take up his reign again.
And Lexi, another thing that which I think also is a defeat in the sense of, we know we have the military defeat and from the ring being destroyed, but at the same time Sauron ultimately has the elves and men unified, joined together, and that is an important thing. I know of course you have Ar-Pharazon and the others have a subsection of with the elves, and then we have Gil-Galad, but we still have the Sauron has just brought a lot of these factions and groups who have been, there's been fights, maybe some discouraging things throughout the Second Age, they all come together, and this moment of the Last Alliance, literally the alliance is played into the events of the Lord of the Rings as well, because everyone has come together, and that is due to Sauron's bidding. So do you think that could add on to the defeat of the War of the Last Alliance?
In the sense that I think Sauron is assuming, I think this is, I forget whether it's Appendix A or maybe something in Unfinished Tales, but there's this idea that Sauron returning to Middle-earth after the downfall of Numenor he feels like he's taken care of the Numenorian threat. Yes, it's going to take him some time to rebuild, but it's okay. He has his ring. He's neutralized the elves more or less. He lost that war, but he did a lot of damage in the process. And he thinks he's just going to wipe out this little tiny contingent of Numenorian remnants who managed to survive. He's quite incensed that they survived at all, and frankly, they shouldn't have. It was another case of that divine intervention plus foresight plus destiny and doom and all that working against him. So yes, the fact that he is defeated by an alliance of these Numenorians and these elves, the Numenorian remnant, as it were, just must have added a little salt to the wound, I guess, because these were two peoples that he deemed had been effectively neutralized, if not permanently defeated, and he was planning sort of his masterstroke, and instead what happened was, instead of being able to sow that division that he enjoys doing so much between elves and dwarves and men, they all do unite. Even Orifar, bless his heart, comes through and fights alongside, if not exactly under, a Noldoran king in Gil-Galad. So that must have been a little bit extra irritating. Although I think the main point and the main link again with the Third Age is the idea that he loses his ring. As long as he has the ring, it's sort of the ultimate safeguard. But as soon as he loses control of it, it becomes really his one vulnerability. So this is when you could argue that this is the beginning of the end for him.
The first time he was really killed in combat, like he died on Numenor, but he still had the ring with him, and then in this battle he really was defeated personally and lost the ring. That's like the most maybe embarrassing or like humiliating defeat in a way, because it's so personal.
Yeah, and that could maybe be encountered to potentially having the Battle of the Gothlope due to the odds as well.
Well, for the War of the Ring, it's kind of the easiest one to argue for. However, it's actually his hardest defeat, in my opinion, because it's the one where he really had all senses on his side. His enemies are militarily weak, they are spiritually weak. Like, without Gandalf, they wouldn't do anything. They are squabbling among themselves, they have a lot of internal problems, lack of communication. And that was Sauron's plan. He planned to divide the three people's realm and then attack them.
You're right that, again, this is kind of the easy pitch to hit. War of the Ring is where he suffers his most permanent defeat. He essentially ceases to exist from a functional standpoint. And as you pointed out, it's kind of... It was an act of essentially divine intervention, as Tolkien says. It's the fact that Sauron doesn't have agency over how the history of Arda is going to be written, in a sense, both literally written by Tolkien, but also in the sense that it's all according to Eru's design, and he can't ultimately transcend that. But that's really the only reason he loses. Again, this is a case where by rights he should have won. The difference here, I think, is that here he loses against, against not just his own plans, but against like the laws of causality. Apart from Gandalf and Aragorn working to rally Rohan and to turn back the Nazgul, he should have taken Minas Tirith. He doesn't, but it's close, and he knows that he can crush it pretty effectively. There's really no unified resistance at the end of the Third Age like there is at the end of the Second. Cross-racial alliance, none of that's happening. So yeah, it's an act of God that just sort of snuffs him out, and it's due to, again, Frodo's persistent mercy and his willingness to be a sacrifice. But even at the very end, Frodo fails. This much has been made of this moment where even Frodo, who is the instrument of redemption, can't resist the power of the ring and the power of Sauron. Nothing can, except a force that's outside of space and time itself.
Yeah, I think that's like the the most significant difference. Like, Sauron doesn't really, like, the Last Alliance had the interventions of Elendil and Isildur surviving, but of course most of the Numenorians that fought and were probably living in Pelagia and in Middle-earth anyway. Like in the War of the Ring, there's really only this hope that Gandalf and Elrond have at the council, that if they just take the ring, like they know Frodo won't be able to throw it into the fire, but if they just take the ring to Mordor and bring it into the best position possible to be destroyed, that there will be there will be a kind of intervention, like Tolkien said it, like the good in this story, good doesn't really defeat evil by force, but just struggling and not being defeated and holding out hope until evil basically defeats itself, as we see like with the lust for the ring that Gollum has, basically causes him to fight with Frodo, and then like he's so happy and overjoyed that he dances around inside the volcano, which you normally wouldn't do, and he falls in. So it's very like not a really military defeat, but it's like the way you see this philosophy, like that evil basically evil defeats itself, which is very different from the other ones, where basically it's kind of there with the Last Alliance, but not really. Like this time it's really just about Sauron being unable to win because of the fundamental forces in the universe, if you can say it like that.
Sauron's mindset at his last moments in the Third Age were pretty much like the ones he had while standing at the top of the temple. He thinks he has won. He's seen his army is going to cross Aragorn. He's going to kill the last one of the line Perendir, etc. And at the last moment, he's surprised in the fall of because a big wave comes and drowns him. And here it's when the ring is destroyed, and he gets the message. So it's somehow both are divine interventions, and they essentially function the same way. Sauron is not aware of them. He does not think it could happen.
Yeah.
I can see, Lex, if you want to go by saying that, I can see the argument for that the fall of Numenor was, you could say, technically divine intervention, but yeah, go ahead, Lexi.
Yeah, I think in both cases, a different flavor of divine intervention, but definitely not defeated by normal material means. But that's his problem, to learn from that mistake, he has to admit that there's something greater than himself, and that's his character flaw. His fundamental error is assuming that he will ultimately be able to control every contingency and twist the world to do just what he wants. And he that's his blind spot. That's what ends up getting him every single time, except again when the elves just kick his butt, because for a reason he should have figured out.
Yeah,
but that's just me.
Maybe that just might add to the War of the Last Alliance bit. The other two, not the other two actually, but the Fall of Numenor and the rings, the War of the Ring was technically how the ring goes into the fire, divine intervention. But I think this is a good time to finally go back to that statement / question one last time. What was Sauron's biggest defeat? And I think there's no one way to give a definitive answer for like overall, but maybe in how you interpret the statement or question is, I think, the main thing. For example, you can go in two ways. What's the biggest defeat, like in finality, when he loses the most, when there's no chance for him to come back? Or maybe what's the biggest defeat in the sense that he has the most odds against him, for him in fact, and that he has all this going for him, and then he somehow manages to defeat at such a high point. That could be militarily as well. So I think separate. I think that's the two main. Of course, I think that lends into embarrassing as well, the second part that I mentioned. And I'm thinking, if we want to go with finality and being an ultimate defeat, we would have to go with the ring being destroyed, because he never returns again. Even I think to show that even in the New Shadow, which was never written, it didn't technically include a cold Sauron, but Sauron himself hadn't returned, which shows that it was basically finality for that character at that point. But if you want to go with in the sense the biggest defeat in this, I think Lexi, you mentioned this as well, of how a big defeat was for him against all odds, then maybe you can go with the War of the Elves and Sauron. There's many interpretations of where you can answer this question, because the different factors which play into that. Is it divine intervention? Is it how big the defeat is? Is it finality, etc.? So yeah, and I will leave this poll up. I'll be on my Twitter for you guys to vote, and then for the next episode we will see which one you guys chose to be the biggest defeat, and that's of course will be interesting to see. But I think this has been a really interesting discussion. I think one of the ones so far that we've really been able to go into depth and discuss all the different ones and then put it all together overall. So yeah, I really enjoyed that, so thank you for that, Lexi.
No problem. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Florian, as well.
Thanks. Goodbye.
And finally, thank you, Imzo.
As always, for inviting me.
Sure. Thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it. Please like and subscribe. But until the next video, my friends, goodbye.